I put a question in my title of my presentation, and I'm one of those people that when I hate it when there's a question, like on a YouTube video, and then they put the answer all the way at the end, and you have to watch like all of this stuff before you get to your answer. So I'm just going to jump right in and start answering this question. Why did Turing study fish? So first of all, it's not a trick question. We are indeed talking about that guy, Mr. Alan Turing, Dr. Alan Turing. And, not like John Turing, the obscure ichthyologist that also studied fish or whatever. It's this guy, the father of modern computer science. Now, to understand where fish fits into the story of Alan Turing, we'll start sort of almost at the beginning with Alan Turing 1.0. This was when he was not Dr. Alan Turing yet. He was a graduate student. He was at Princeton. And the great German mathematician David Hilbert had come up with a list of the big outstanding problems in mathematics. Turing was a mathematician, so he said, hey, I'm an ambitious young grad student. Let me grab one of Hilbert's problems and see if I can have a go at it. As a graduate student myself, I can say this is not a smart approach. Do not pick one of the big open questions in your field and try to solve it. They are very, very hard. But Turing did so. He tackled a problem that Hilbert called the Entscheidungsproblem, or the decidability problem. And what the problem was, basically, it said that if we have a statement in maths, or a mathematical or a logical kind of statement, will there exist a finite deterministic process that will determine if such a statement is true or false? Is there an algorithm that can solve a given yes or no question? And what Turing found in his paper, which was published, it was called Computable Numbers, with a lot of very fancy maths, is that there are indeed statements that we cannot decide if they are true or false by means of a finite deterministic process. That is, to translate out of maths and into computer speak, there are some things that our algorithms just can't solve. For example, algorithms cannot analyze other algorithms. We cannot look at a particular algorithm in a systematic way and know if that algorithm is ever going to stop or if it will get stuck in some sort of an infinite loop. For the math nerds here, the Collat's conjecture is a very famous example of this. Does it stop? Does it go on forever? Well, we kind of don't know, and we don't know if we ever can know. And thanks, Alan Turing, for that little mindfuck. So that was Turing 1.0, solves huge outstanding problems in mathematics. Wasn't given a PhD for that work because his PhD work was actually something else. And maybe foreshadowing software, they were like, cool, Alan, that's great, but it's a bit out of scope. Can you please just stick to the scope, please? But then after this, after basically doing great work in maths, this other guy came along, a little-known supervillain by the name of Adolf Hitler, and he decided he's just going to fuck everyone's shit up, and basically started this big old thing, also, you might have heard of it, called World War II. So they then called on Alan Turing, knowing that he had this knowledge in maths, and they had him work on one of the very big, important problems of the war, which was cracking the enigma codes. So the Germans and their U-boats and all their weapons of war had this encryption scheme, this encryption device called an enigma. It's a good name because it was hard to break. And they said, well, Alan, you know about automatic computation. You did this whole paper on how we can construct algorithms for things. Why don't you have a go at it? So at his time at Bletchley Park, there were two dimensions of Turing's work. One had to do with taking these theoretical ideas he had done around computable numbers and realizing them into the mechanical bits and pieces they had at the time, which were rudimentary. They didn't have transistors. So he is helping to realize this in physical form. They built a device called the bomb. Turns out a bomb is actually like an old-fashioned word for a cabinet. Okay, cool, I didn't know that. And also he did some other work with information theory. He worked closely with Claude Shannon, the father of modern information science, to reduce the entropy of the encryption to make it easier to decrypt these things. So it's a modern example of scalability. First of all, build your machines to scale it, and then also analytically reduce the complexity of your problem. So that was great, cool. So Alan 1.0, huge open problem in maths, that's already a great job. 2.0, saving the world, thank you. And then we went on to Alan Turing 3.0. After the war, he went up to Manchester. and started working on a field called mathematical biology, working specifically on a problem called morphogenesis. What is morphogenesis, you may ask? Morphogenesis is a biological process that causes a cell, tissue, or organism to develop its shape. So genesis having to do with the origin of stuff, and morpho having to do with the shape or form of stuff. We're going to use our imaginations. Now, I want you, if you will, to imagine just a cell, a single cell. But to make the imaginings a little bit easier, imagine the cell is like kind of big so you can see it. So we got a little blob, right? And now the blob sort of gets bigger and bigger, and then bloop, we've got 2 blobs, right? And then some time goes by and the blobs repeat this process, and then we have 4 blobs. And these blobs are all identical to one another. And then there's 4 blobs, and then 8 blobs, and 16 blobs, and 32 blobs, and 64 blobs. And we got all the powers of 2. How high can you go? Very high. It goes on very, so we end up with a lot of blobs. But now if we ask the question, this process now continues through quite a few generations, what is the shape that this sort of blobby thing is going to form into? It's just going to be a bigger blob, because all of the cells are identical. There is no overarching intelligence or no mechanism that says, hey, you blobs there, you guys need to divide because we want to have more organism here. You guys stop. We don't say, hey, we need an arm up here, go do the arm thing, lots of cells, lots of blobbing out here. You guys are going to be a leg, lots there. You guys, tummy, you need to stop now. It's not happening because these cells are all isolated. They have no mechanism for talking to one another. And of course, they're cells. They're like, not very smart. So morphogenesis is basically, how do the blobs know when to continue dividing to create the different shapes? And when do they know to stop dividing? To take it into a little bit of a more tangible example, and to make the fish thing somehow relevant, we can look here at the imbu pufferfish. Now this is a fish, it's a pufferfish, so it does do the whole thing. And it lives in the upper reaches of the Congo River, second largest river in Africa. If that ever comes up in your quiz, remember it, thank me later. But the cool thing about the imbu pufferfish is that it has these interesting patterns on its skin, this interesting pattern of yellow and black skin cells. Now we think about the morphogenesis question and we ask, okay, but this is just a skin cell. They're just dividing to make more skin cells. What is the mechanism that one skin cell has to know whether it should be a yellow or a black skin cell? There's no guiding thing that says, hey, you there, you're a little bit too far away from the radix. You need to be yellow, but you guys are close enough. You need to be black. Somehow a skin cell emerges and knows what color it needs to be to realize a pattern that's distributed across several million cells. How does it know how to do this? How does this work? That is the morphogenesis question. Now, the answer that Alan Turing came up with was, of course, maths, because if you ask a mathematician to solve a problem, he's going to solve it using maths. And these equations here are called reaction diffusion equations. And if you look on the left, you can see we've got partial differential equations, and there's more than one of them. So I know enough about maths to know that when you start having to deal with systems of partial differential equations, that's when you go and become a computer scientist instead. They are ludicrously difficult to solve and to derive, but these equations govern the pattern that emerges on the skin of the imbu pufferfish. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, Johan. Oh, yes. So when these equations are applied, they form these kinds of patterns, which are known as Turing patterns. But now I know what you might be thinking. Okay, cool. We've got fish. We've got a pattern that emerges that's very complicated maths. Whoops. Fish can't do maths, right? So you can kind of train them up a little bit. Apparently it's possible to train a goldfish to jump through hoops, but they're not really intelligent, right? A fish can't do complicated maths. So we have here something of a paradox that like, okay, cool, we have a fish which is a fundamentally very kind of like not smart creature, but it has this property, the skin pattern, that requires very, very complicated maths to get right. If you wanted to draw the patterning of this fish on a piece of paper and you'd want to do it correctly, you would have to do a lot of very, very complicated maths. So how was the fish doing it? It's clearly not doing it. What's happening is every single skin cell on the fish is following a very simple algorithm. When you have a lot of these skin cells following the same simple algorithm in a large, interconnected, distributed system, complicated and perhaps intelligent behavior arises. Because what is actually happening, what is actually going on with these reaction diffusion equations is that these govern how particular signaling chemicals diffuse through a substrate. So they diffuse through the substrate based on time, they move through time, but also interacting with one another and interacting with themselves. And as time goes by, and say we got two chemical signalers, one that says make yellow pigment and one that says make black pigment. As time goes by, they will start to diffuse through a substrate and form our Turing patterns. Now, if I'm a skin cell and I happen to fall in one of the regions where the chemical signaler for producing black pigment is in high concentration, I'm going to then say, oh, cool, I need to produce black pigment. Similarly, if I'm in a region where the chemical signaler for producing yellow pigment is in high concentration, I will produce yellow pigment. So what we have is a very simple set of rules that are being followed by tiny, individual, stupid cells being applied through a large, interconnected, distributed system, and the result of that is complex behavior. What we have is a phenomenon called emergence. Emergence occurs when a complex entity has properties that its parts do not have and only emerge when they interact in a wider whole. Simple cells, none of them individually has got Turing patterns, none of them individually has any kind of complicated form. But when they interact in an interconnected, distributed system, what comes out can be very unexpected and very, perhaps, intelligent. So this is why I think Turing studied fish, because he had already seen what types of things you can do by connecting up small bits in large, complicated things. Every single component in Turing's computer that cracked the Enigma code was simple and stupid by itself. These were simple logic gates. They weren't doing anything other than looking at voltages and telling you, are they the same or are they different? But what emerged from that was a process that could crack the most difficult, complicated encryption scheme that mankind had ever conceived of. The ability to crack codes is something that humans couldn't do. We are too slow. But somehow, very fancy rocks that we taught how to do maths, when they're combined together, can do it. And there we have the sort of nascent idea of intelligence happening, because do our neurons not just do the same thing? Very simple, stupid things, following stupid algorithm, large, distributed, interconnected system, and the result is something that we could not possibly imagine. So now that I've answered the actual question of the talk, I can now go back to the things that I usually would have started with. This is about me. That is a picture of me. I am Johan. I've come all the way from Johannesburg. Usually I'm a very big Cape Town fanboy, but I've never been here in winter. Your weather sucks. So tempering my enthusiasm, but Cape Town's still beautiful. I'm very happy to be here. I've got two beautiful girls. I've been enjoying watching their own sort of emergent intelligence happening and not happening. I'm a software engineer at Intellect, currently working on a project for Capitec. So if you bank with Capitec and you take out your app and you think, gee, this is a really, really cool app, you're welcome. And finally, I'm a PhD student at Tukkies doing research on multi-agent systems and game theory. That's a whole other talk, so if you're in the selection committee, look out for that one coming next year. But let's talk now about emergence and have a look at a few other examples of how this might happen. Oh, and a demo. Okay. Last time my demo didn't work so well, so you guys are in for... I don't know. Okay, this looks good, great, cool. So this is Conway's Game of Life. It's created in the 60s or 70s, and what we have is a grid of cells. Inside each grid, either you can have an organism that lives there, or you cannot have an organism that lives there. And these organisms live and die by very simple rules. If an organism has only got one neighbor, unfortunately, it dies. Yes. If it has 2 neighbors, I think it also dies. If it has got more than 4 neighbors, then it dies from overcrowding. So either if it's too lonely, it dies, or if it's too overcrowded, it dies, a little bit like us. And then we also have this interesting thing of reproduction. So this particular cell has got 3 neighbors. And because it's got 3 neighbors, in the next tick of time, it will come to life. So they have got a cool, like, 3-way reproduction system. That's pretty kinky, I approve. And we take this game of life and think, okay, cool. What can you actually do with this? Like, okay, we got these simple rules. What's going to emerge as we put lots of things together? So sometimes they might end up in stable configuration. So if I just play this one, you'll see that, okay, cool, it ran for a bit and then it ended up getting sort of stuck in this loop. There are other kind of configurations that do interesting things. I'll just show you one other. This one's called a glider, like that. And as I play this one, you see it starts to slowly crawl across the screen. From a given starting pattern, will the number of individuals, the little things that are on or off, diverge, or will it always enter a kind of a stable pattern? Will it always stay the same? Or maybe will it always go to 0? Eventually, the population will always die out. What's going to happen to this little population of cells as time goes by? What is their fate? If we have pattern A and pattern B, can we ask systematically, will pattern B ever emerge if we start the execution from pattern A? Can we tell if a given pattern will ever enter a loop? Oh, hello, Turing. Loops, you say? You're saying we're going to look at this thing and know, does it go on forever or does it ever go into a loop? Sounds like decidability. Okay, great. Promised you it's related to computer science. And then a follow-up question is, are Conway's rules the only ones that have this kind of interesting property that we can make these interesting things? Now, the fun thing about the game of life is that, as I alluded to earlier, there is a lot of parallels between the game of life and computers. We can think of the grid, where every element in the grid is occupied or not occupied by an individual, as a binary memory space. Regular computers have logically a single sequential memory where we can address everyone individually, and every single little location in memory on a computer either has a bit that is set or is unset. More specifically, there is either a voltage that is high or low. So in our computers, we have one-dimensional memory of bits that are voltages that are set or unset. And in Conway's game of life, we have a 2-dimensional memory space of organisms that are either alive or dead, or not alive yet, or I don't know. We also have rules that govern how the state of the cells in the memory space changes. We saw this with its rules of reproduction and death in Conway's game of life, but in computers, so we have the same things. We have little logic gates. You can have a NAND gate as an atomic kind of axiomatic system for computers. And we have these little gates that connect memory together, and we say if these bits are set, if they have a high voltage, then in the next tick of the next clock cycle of the computer, these bits should be set. So every tick of the computer, there's a deterministic process that looks at the bits that are set within all the different parts of your computer and determines exactly which bits should be set in the next stage. So too with Conway's game of life, there is a rule that looks at the memory space and decides deterministically what the next memory space should look like. Interesting thing about it, though, is that the game of life is in fact Turing complete. So like we were able to build a computer with one-dimensional memory and logic gates, so too can we build a computer with 2-dimensional memory and Conway's rules. Anything that you can run on a normal computer, you can run on Conway's game of life. That means that there is some combination of cells that I can light up at the beginning, that when I press run and it runs through several billion generations, can run something that my computer runs. It can effectively simulate a computer. The only difference is the rules of computation that underpin it and the dimensionality of the memory space. Now, an interesting question that arises for me from this is that you could then take a popular computer program of today called ChatGPT and encode it into Conway's game of life and run it. You would have your cells set in a particular configuration. You would run it. You would also have to take your input and somehow encode that into cells that are alive and dead, just like your computer takes your input and encodes it into separate bits that are set or not set, runs a deterministic process, changes the bits, and then you can interpret the bits and take out language. We could do the same with Conway's game of life. We can run ChatGPT and effectively have a conversation with it. But the question that this brings up for me is to ask, what is the entity with which I'm having a conversation if I were to do this? Because Conway's game of life is made up of simple organisms that just live and die according to simple rules. And it's run through billions of generations. And the thing that I end up having a conversation with is a resultant property of millions and millions of cells living through billions and billions of generations. And what emerges is something that me as a human can say, oh, this is a conversation. I'm asking it to summarize a text or whatever. The individual organisms of Conway's game of life could never possibly do this because they're just bits. And the rules of Conway's game of life are just live and die. When I explained how it worked, I didn't think anybody would say, oh yeah, I can have a conversation with that. But you can, in theory. If you tell Caden about this, he might build it. So now we go from simulated biology of Conway's game of life to actual real biology. By the way, if you recognize where this little guy comes from, congrats. What does it feel like to be old? 40 coming up fast? It's too fast. We talk about leafcutter ants. Now, leafcutter ants are a fascinating species. It's not a species, actually, it's a whole family. They, unsurprisingly, cut leaves. They also cut grass, so maybe the leaf guys had better PR. But what they do is they go out into the forests and they cut leaves and grass and other greenery. But they don't eat it. They take it back to their ant colonies and they put it into a special chamber where there is a fungus which grows. And the fungus eats the leaves. The ants can't eat the leaves for the same reason we can't eat the leaves. It's not digestible to them. But the fungus can break down the cellulose in the leaves, and then the ants eat the fungus. So what the ants are doing is actually a form of large-scale agriculture. And not just agriculture, it's actually a very sophisticated agricultural economy. In the anthill, they have specialized labor. They have some ants that go and cut the leaves. They're probably the rock stars of the anthill. But we also have ants that go and tend to eggs or whatever. We have the queen ant. She basically chills and lays eggs. We have little ants that go and look after the fungus and do some weeding. So if some bad bacteria get in there, they quickly clean them out. They have specialized division of labor. They have a sustainable and symbiotic relationship with the fungus. The fungus gets to be fed and gets to live in ideal conditions. The ants get to eat the fungus. Everybody's happy. They practice sanitation to keep the crops clean. Like I said, if anything funky gets in there, they take it right out. They have special environmental controls. The anthills are built in such a way that the growth chambers for the fungus are maintained at optimal humidity and temperature throughout the year. They experiment and optimize inputs. So if certain leaves are working well, they get more of them. If leaves are working badly, they get less. The system obviously scales to include millions and billions of individuals. They have feedback systems, so if they get some tainted leaves in, maybe someone sprayed a tree with some bad stuff and they start harvesting that and the fungus gets unhappy, the ants will stop harvesting those leaves. And also for me, and this is probably the most interesting thing, is that they store food for the long term. And why this is interesting is because the lifespan of a worker leafcutter ant is like 8 or 9 months. But a drought can go on for several years. So from the perspective of a leafcutter ant, a drought is a multi-generational environmental catastrophe. When they are storing food for the long term, they are not storing food because they might be hungry tomorrow. They are storing food because in 20 or 30 generations' time, there might be an ongoing drought that just doesn't seem to stop. It lasts their entire lives. But they are able to plan and store enough food to get them through these hard periods, which I think exceeds our own ability to plan for the future as humans. But from an ant's perspective, it's very simple, right? Ants don't worry about the large-scale, economics of running a massive agricultural economy. The ant just says, hey, let me go get some food. Oh, I've got some food. Let me take it back. Also, don't think about my code. That's bad. Don't code like that. Like, why should the state of food found change inside one of those functions? It's not good. No. Comments on that PR, thank you. So the ants don't know what the anthill is doing. The ant perspective is very rudimentary and simple. But when we take the ant and we apply the simple ant algorithm, In a large, interconnected, distributed system, we end up with an emergent property, which is an agricultural economy, which exceeds the comprehension of the individual ants. There is an emergent intelligence in an anthill that can plan for the future, that can look after its fungus, that can maintain the trees around it, that emerges spontaneously as a result of the actions of the ant. And I would again then ask the question, what is the entity that has these properties? The anthill is not a single thing, it's a conglomeration of different things working together. We look at another example, and this here is called a moire pattern. Now, what a moire pattern is we've got two sets of concentric circles, black circles on a transparent background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to gradually move the one circle over the other, and I want you to just watch and sort of see what happens. So it starts to move. And the first thing we can see are horizontal lines moving upwards and outwards away from the center. Then, as the circle starts to overlap, we can start to see soon some spokes that are at the top and bottom that move towards the left and the right of the image. Now, what we saw when the patterns were moving, when the moire pattern was happening, this optical illusion, were straight lines. But there are no straight lines here. In fact, the moire pattern is following a very simple algorithm. We can think about it from the perspective of an individual pixel, and every pixel is just deciding, should I be a black pixel or a white pixel, just like the skin cells of the fish. And every single tick of the animation process, it basically says, cool, I will be black or white depending on whether or not my neighbor was black or white in the previous tick, because that is how it moves. Every pixel simply takes on the value of its neighbor. So every single individual pixel is following an extremely simple algorithm. But at the end of it, we have an emergent property that isn't anywhere in this. No pixel is saying, oh, we're going to have cool horizontal lines that move around. A pixel can't comprehend movement. Obviously, it's just a pixel. And we have something that circles, but the result is something that is straight lines. So again, we have an optical phenomenon that emerges as a result of small things following a very simple process. Another interesting example of an optical example is this illusion called the Penrose Stare. This is a painting or a drawing by M.C. Escher. And it's kind of this cool, impossible picture. If you've never seen it before, you can just stare at it for a moment. But here the atomic entity is every single stare, because every single stare follows a simple set of rules for how it should be positioned relative to the stairs around it. If the stair is going up, it needs to be like a bit this way, and if the stair is moving towards you, it needs to be like a bit this way. So every single stair is following a very simple algorithm of where it needs to be positioned relative to the steps around it. But the resultant property is this illusion of this impossible space that we could never actually build in real life. One more example that I want to go through. It was very hard to find an example from music, so there's just so many. But let's do this one. So what I want you all to do is close your eyes. And then when I say the word go, what you're going to do is you're just going to start to clap a simple rhythm, right? That's it. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, thanks. Cool. Who told you to all clap at the same time? Which one of you said, hey, you guys clap faster than the Joburg crowd, though. I like this energy. One of you decided, hey, we're going to clap at that beat. I don't know, it's about 90 BPM. We're going to go at that one. Everybody? Was there a scrum master who came in and made sure we were all aligned on that tempo? God, PTSD, I'm sorry. No. Everybody was following a simple algorithm. I said clap, which you did, thank you. But you also did something else as you listened and responded to the claps that you could hear around you. And some of you maintained your clap and people merged towards you, and others changed their clap subtly to accommodate the claps around them. And after a very, very short period of time, the entire room was coordinated into the same tempo. So the clapping that we had at the end, that BPM that emerged, is an emergent property of this room. You are all my ants, and the anthill taps the metronome rhythm. Every one of you follows a simple algorithm, and yet we have something that emerged as a result, some kind of group intelligence that governed how fast we should all be clapping together. But now I must apologize because I've used certain words that are not well defined. I've used words like intelligent, complex, simple. But of course, these words are slippery because they are words that we ourselves have defined, right? We as humans took this thing called intelligence. We decided that it's the really good thing, that it's a great thing to have, and then not in any modest way at all decided that it's also the thing that we have. But if we consider this perspective, it's got a fancy name, anthropocentrism. It's got to be like we're centered on people, on us. Makes sense. But let's consider again these ideas of intelligence and complexity and simplicity from the worldview of an ant. So here's the human perspective, right? There's us. We have got our simple ants. We have got our intelligent us. And we have some sort of incomprehensible Ubermind thing of science fiction that I can't tell you what it is because it's incomprehensible. It's a nice cop-out as a presenter. But if we think about the ant's perspective, they see things a little bit differently. For them, they might think of a rock as being like quite a simple thing. And they would look at other ants and sort of say, well, this is intelligent. I like your leaf cutting technique, good for you. They don't really, they see themselves, their anthropocentric is more like anthropocentric viewpoint. I just made that up right now, oh my God. And they would look at us and be like, they would find this utterly incomprehensible. I mean, how would you explain DevConf to an ant? It wouldn't get it. It would like, you guys are not harvesting food? Like, oh no, we are, there's food. I don't know, ants wouldn't get it. But just like they wouldn't understand our intelligence, ants are also incapable of understanding the intelligence of the anthill. Even though the anthill intelligence is a direct result of their collective actions, they don't understand it, and they can't understand it. It goes beyond their capacity to understand. They collectively create something that is beyond their comprehension, but the thing that they create keeps them alive through generation and generation and generation. We shift the perspective back to us, where we, together, just like how we clapped and had some emergent properties emerging from our clapping, we also operate in our own anthill. We are also having our own ant colony called society that has got its own properties too. So just how the ants follow their algorithm and something emerges that is way beyond their comprehension, way beyond their ability to understand, it is also then possible that as we collaborate together as humans and interact in our own vast, distributed, and connected system, what emerges is a society that has an incomprehensible intelligence of its own. If we look to maths, we can go back to maths and think about David Hilbert and his decidability problem that he gave to Turing. But he had another problem that was called completeness. And there was the result from Gödel that said, in any consistent formal system, there are true statements that cannot be proven within the system. That is, within maths, there are mathematical statements that are true, but we cannot ever know that they are true. We can only really speculate. So that's this guy, Kurt Gödel. He looks like he's about to just wreck everybody's maths day. But he told us that there are true things that cannot be proven. Okay, cool. Worse, there are infinitely many true things that cannot be proven. Even worse, there are more true things that cannot be proven than true things that can be proven. So our maths and our science, our sharpest, best possible tools for distilling the truth from our observations of the universe, is incapable of deriving almost all of the truth that exists. We are on a tiny, tiny dot of comprehensive knowledge that is adrift in a massive universe of things that are utterly and permanently inaccessible to us using our best tools for distilling truth. But this, of course, we all know that there's things that are incomprehensible that emerge in our society. We have things like war. We have things like mob violence. We have things like racism and cruelty. We have these ugly things, but we also have good things. We have collaboration. We have friendship. We have love, we have trust. And I don't think anybody could look at a single individual and from the individual derive the fact that our society is going to have all of these things. These things are emergent properties of our collaboration here as humans. And they are also beyond our comprehension. Who here can truly say, oh yeah, friendship, I know what that is, I get it. We can sort of grasp towards it, we can feel it. We don't really understand it. And now, of course, with artificial intelligence, we are starting to create beings that in some small ways might be as intelligent as we are. Maybe, I don't know. And we are starting to directly monkey with the process of our own emergent society. Because not only will it be an emergent property of our society, but it will also be the society that we have with all of these agents that we speak to all the time. So, as we embark upon this new age, perhaps, of artificial intelligence, we must be aware that we are working with forces that are perhaps beyond our comprehension. We are influencing things that we cannot see. So as we go forward, we must go with caution and with the hope that the new society that we forge with our new artificial creations is not one of war or injustice or cruelty or hatred, but one full of collaboration, friendship, trust, and above all else, love. Thank you.